Oh, thank you, Stephen. I'll tell you, he goes out of his way to get us here, so you guys should be thankful. I think he's messaged me daily for years. Let's see, are we on screen? New. I hope you guys had that nice vegan diet, so that vegan meal, so that you are. Do I have to push a button? So that you're awake for me and don't fall asleep on me. Whenever I talk to like doctors, they've always just eaten their meat-based diets in the back, and then they're falling asleep while I'm talking to them, so it's kind of tough. All right. Do I need to push something? Is it cricket? Oh, he's coming. Okay, we got it. All right. So this talk's going to be a little bit different. I want to talk to you about my own personal existential crisis. And hopefully through it, you could learn a little bit about obesity, a little bit about understanding that the human body is complex, and a little bit about patient shaming. And I hope it's interesting for you. See, I'm the medical director now of weight management in Asheville. I moved from Houston to Asheville because it's beautiful. See, it's nice, beautiful mountains here. This is our place. Come visit Asheville. It's a gorgeous place, great vegan food. Don't stay, though. It's getting too crowded. But it's interesting because over here, people are pretty healthy. Up here is the Appalachian Mountains. They don't know what quinoa is in the Appalachian Mountains. They don't know what healthy organic food is. They do know what Bojangles fried chicken is. And that is one of their primary concerns. And so I have to deal with this population. And I have to deal with them from a global perspective. What do I tell the population of Asheville and the Appalachian Mountains to eat? But also I've got to deal with individual people as they come to me. And so when Stephen asked me to talk about a topic, any of you follow me on social media? You know I could be a little bit of a loudmouth in there. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. You clap until I say something you don't like and then send me real mean messages. But, you know, when there's a topic that I know about, I could get fairly argumentative. If there's anything I know about, it's obesity. In fact, I think about obesity constantly. If you see me daydreaming in the corner, I'm thinking about obesity. I myself used to be overweight, and I was actually not very healthy. And as Stephen mentioned, I'd written a book saying eat animal protein, but at the time, I got sick. I had hypertension and high cholesterol, and I went crazy. So this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. I take over the dining room in my house so that we can't have people over, and I read the research. And that led me to write the book Proteinaholic, and got me to really be interested in a plant-based diet. But I'm agnostic about things in that science speaks to me. I listen to science. That's my God when it comes to what I'm going to tell a person in my office about what they should do and what they should eat, what medicines they should take. And so I don't tell people they have to be vegan because I don't feel like the research says they have to be vegan. I'm vegan. I wear, vegan shoes and vegan belts for different reasons than health. But I do think a vegan diet is extremely healthy. But that's not what I'm going to talk to you about so much. I've done this conference before in my videos that I've done before talking about protein and Proteinaholic are up there. But I'm going to talk about something else. Because when it comes to obesity, while I have studied this for years and would be considered an expert at it, I feel like this. I feel frustrated by it. I feel that I've been treating obesity for 18 to 20 years and have had very little success. I feel like the country, my societies, I'm a member of the American Society for Obesity and the Obesity Society, Obesity Medical Association. We've really done a pretty poor job. You saw Dr. Willett's talk. Is the country getting less fat after all that we know? Not at all. And I go to weight loss surgery conferences because you got to understand, I talked on talks all around the country about plant-based diets and stuff. And so you would think that's what my life is, but my life is spent looking like this. I cut people open, all right? And I do so for reasons that we will get into, but it does come with a little bit of existential crisis because I go to these conferences and we're talking about weight loss, and I'll spend a week at a conference with 3 times the size of this audience, and we're talking about obesity, we're talking about weight loss, and we never talk about food. Food doesn't enter into the equation, and so that's a very odd scenario for me to be in. I don't know how I feel about it. On one hand, I know that a plant-based diet helps with keeping the country in a healthy weight. But at the same time, I got to deal with the people that are now overweight. And sometimes, anybody used to be a Trekkie? Okay, so I don't know if you remember the episode in Star Trek where they went back and it was like 1984 or something, and Doc is there and he sees the surgeons and they're doing surgery and he looks at me, he's like, "You're cutting them open? You barbarians!" And that plays in my mind every time I put a knife to someone's skin. I think, am I a barbarian doing this? Now, of course, I make these tiny little incisions and I put these little scopes and I do this minimally invasive surgery, we call it. Because we're not barbarians, we're minimally invasive surgeons. The old surgeons, they were barbarians, all right? We're not barbarians, but I know 20 years from now, they're probably gonna look back on me and think, he was a barbarian doing what he did. And it's things I gotta think about because look, I'm sure you guys have seen this cartoon before. And it's this idea that healthcare, doctors are mopping up the floor, right? We're giving you Lipitor to treat your high cholesterol. We're doing weight loss surgery on you to treat your obesity. But really what should be happening is we should be turning off the sink, right? And when we talk about plant-based diets and things like that for a global perspective, yes, that helps turn off the sink. But I gotta deal with this. I gotta deal with Marcus when he comes into my office. And I think everybody needs to take a minute and look at Marcus and think to yourself, what do you think about Marcus when you see him? What goes through your mind? Maybe in the deep, deep graces. What was that? Eating plenty of crap, right. And why is he doing it? Is it his fault? Is he sloppy? Is he low self-esteem? Is this a depression thing? Is he lazy? Is Marcus lazy? Yeah. And I'll tell you, in medicine, a lot of doctors see this, and they'll call me and they'll be like, "Oh, man, I got this fat guy for you." And that always, that kind of, that hurts me when they say that because I know these people better than they do. They don't give them a chance. And I'll tell you one thing. We go to these conferences and we get excited, right? And you leave here, and the one thing you think is, I know how to do it. If Marcus just did it my way. How many health coaches do we have? We got some health coaches out there. How many doctors out there? Medical professionals, dietitians. I mean, you leave this conference, you get charged up, right? I saw Brenda Davis's talk. This is how you got to do it. And if he doesn't do it that way, then he's not going to work. My way is the best way. And I know that I get the same way. Like I go to a conference like this, I get really excited. And, I go out to dinner with my friends and they're, "Please don't be preachy tonight." And I'm like, "I promise I won't be preachy." But 2 kombuchas later, and I'm like, plant-based diet is the answer to... But the thing I got to tell you, though, I love that picture. The thing I got to tell you, and this is really important, and this is going to rub people the wrong way, but I don't care who you are or what you do out there. I don't care what kind of plant-based program you run or what kind of program you run. You cannot beat my surgery results. There is no way that you can beat my surgery results. Can't do it. Won't even come close. Not only won't you beat it, you won't even come close. There's reasons why that's the case, all right? I mean, diets don't work. We know that, right? There's a great article that was in New England, in the New York Times by Gina Colada, where she went through all the research on diets and showed just how badly diets work. And she concluded that we need to be doing more surgery, which is weird. We weren't born with a deficit of surgery, right? But she is bringing up an important fact. There is about 15 to 17 million people in the country who could benefit from weight loss surgery, but we only do about 200,000 a year. So there's a huge discrepancy, and she was looking at that. And she was looking at the fact that diets don't work. Now, diets don't work for many reasons, okay? First of all, the ridiculous fascination we have with macronutrients. It's crazy. The problem with nutrient by nutrient science is that it takes the nutrient out of context of the food out of context of the diet, and the diet out of context of the lifestyle. I can't stand macronutrients. My patients know this. Do not come into my office and tell me that for breakfast you ate a protein, because I will go crazy. And I hate it, when you go and you order a salad, and they're like, "Would you like a protein with your salad?" And of course, everybody at the table who knows me is like, "Oh God, here we go." And I'm always like, "What do you mean by a protein? My salad's got beans, doesn't it?" And the guy's like, "Yeah." I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, do you want steak or do you want chicken?" I'm like, Well, those have as much fat as they do protein. So you're asking me if I want fat with my salad? And the guy's like, listen, I'm 16 years old. This is a summer job. Can you just... But it's crazy because what this does is it's created this weird low-fat versus low-carb battle, right? This is the big battle, low-fat versus low. What is low-fat versus, what's a low-fat person eating? What's a low-carb person eating? This all started, interestingly, with a very good effort by the Senate. They had the Senate Select Committee on nutrition, and they were actually started to look at undernutrition. They found that there wasn't that much undernutrition in America, but there was tons of overnutrition. And they did this very elaborate study called the McGovern Committee. And the McGovern Committee decided that we need to eat less meat, less dairy, eat less eggs. And what happened? The meat, dairy, and egg industry went crazy. Now, you can't say that. They got McGovern voted out. And actually, the recommendations, one of the recommendations was specifically eat less meat. That recommendation got changed to not eat less meat, but eat more lean meat. And then we started talking about low fat. You know, well, lean meat means low fat meat. Let's start eating low fat. And so you could see when the low fat guidelines came out, and what happened? Did it help? Are we less obese since the low fat guidelines? No. Now you got to understand, it said eat low fat, but we didn't eat low fat. We ate more fat. We ate more of everything. We ate a lot more of these because it was reduced fat, you know, and it's vegan. So you can have your reduced fat Oreo and be healthy, right? The other thing that happens is, and you know, if any of you follow me or read my book, you know I'm very big on what good science is versus bad science. And the low-fat versus low-carb science literature drives me crazy like fingernails on a chalkboard. It is such bad science. And it's set up that way. You will have the dairy and the meat industry set up studies. They set up what's called straw men so they could beat them. So here's a low-fat versus a low-carb study. The low-carb group lost more weight than the low-fat group. So therefore, low-carb is what we should be doing. But wait a second. The low-fat group went from 35% fat to 30% fat. Is 30% fat low fat? That's not low fat. And they didn't change that much. They didn't make a big change in their diet, while the low carb group made a big dietary change. It's easier for a low carb group. When you tell an American, I want you to not eat your entree, just eat your sides, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? I just got to eat my corn, that's it? I don't want to do that. But if you tell them, look, don't eat the sides, just eat the entree, they're like, okay, I'll eat my steak, that's fine. It's easier for them to do that. And so that's a big difference. This study was all over the media because the low-carb people love to think that if you go low-carb, that regardless of calorie intake, you're going to be healthier. So they did this study, and they came up with this thing, dietary carbohydrate restriction improves metabolic syndrome independent of weight loss. This is called p-hacking. So what p-hacking is, you do a study, and you investigate every kind of, you set up like 1 million different parameters because you're looking for just that one parameter that sticks out. And you can be like, aha, that parameter sticks out. I'm going to run with this and call the New York Times and get an article. And that's what they did. So they took a group of people, they put them on low carb versus a high carb diet, high carb, low fat. Now, funding, dairy. And each of the authors have they're all funded by Dairy or Atkins or Virta Health. These are all low carb things. And so they did the study, low carb versus low fat, and guess what? There was no difference in weight between the two. There was no difference in waist measures. There's no difference in blood sugar control, no difference in blood pressure. Really, there was no difference between the two groups. But they found that the HDL was slightly higher, triglycerides slightly lower, and there was no difference in your cholesterol level, but the LDL size was a little bit bigger. So therefore, metabolic health is better. That's ridiculous. So basically, the study showed nothing, but you guys aren't really true scientists, so you might not know that, or if you are, you would know it, but if you didn't read the whole study. And this went on the front page of all these articles everywhere, that low carb is better for your metabolic health. Now, not only did they not show any difference, I want you to look, because with science, they have supplement sections in the articles. I always read the supplement sections, because I want to know, what did they actually feed the high carb group? Well, for lunch, the high carb, low fat group had cheddar cheese. They had marshmallow fluff. Marshmallow fluff. This is how bad science can get out there in order to fool the public. I mean, here, ignore this outside stuff here. Here, this guy published, he compared a study that showed people that weren't in ketosis, how much fat they burned, versus people that were in ketosis, how much fat they burned. Oh my gosh, you burn more fat exercising if you're ketosis, so I should do ketosis. But wait a second, now let's look at the outside. This study, 300 people, this study, 5. This study, 15 to 30 minutes of exercise. This study, 2.5 hours. Differences all the way down. These are two completely different groups. That's how they try to confuse you. You get people like this out there that'll actually tell you plants are dangerous to your health. Plants are dangerous to your health? How can anybody possibly say that? And he wrote a book about it. And it's got no science in it. It's not referenced like my book. But people believe it. And this whole idea of carbohydrates, this idea that carbohydrates make you fat just absolutely kills me. Carbohydrates, there's been many studies. This was a really good study that it was a meta-analysis, looked over many different studies. There is no correlation between carb intake and obesity. There is none. Carbs do not make you fat. If they made you fat, the Okinawans would be fat. They eat mainly rice and sweet potatoes. That's the vast majority of their diet. They eat 85% of their diet from carbohydrate. And yet, if you look at a traditional Okinawan, they lose weight as they get older, unlike Americans where we keep gaining weight. And in fact, you might not know this, but your body can't really turn a carb to fat. It's called de novo lipogenesis. For you to take a carbohydrate and turn it to fat, you have to have saturated all your glycogen stores and then eaten so many calories that your body will then turn it to fat, and that is a very rare situation. Your body doesn't turn carbs to fat. But then, it doesn't matter, all these different diets that are out there, none of them really work. I mean, it's called the A to Z trial, and they looked at all the different diets, and over a year, what happened, they all lost about the same amount of weight, and it wasn't that much weight. Talking about 3 to 4 kilograms. Atkins did the best, but the Ornish diet, was it really on an Ornish diet? Again, you got to read between the lines. They were eating about 20 grams of fiber a day. That should be an Ornish breakfast, 20 grams of fiber. And they were eating higher protein than they ate before, and they were eating 30% fat. So it wasn't a real Ornish diet. In fact, no one really stuck to the diet anyway, and it didn't work. When you look at ketosis, if you take ketosis patients and you put them in a ward and you study them, when you go into ketosis, what happens is your body gets rid of all of its carbohydrates stored as glycogen. Well, your body stores glycogen with water. So a lot of the weight loss is actually water weight. And in fact, your ability to burn fat actually slows down in ketosis, not speeds up. But all of these diets, they're all they've got bad design. They don't feed the people the right stuff. And Dr. Willett showed this study, but to elaborate a bit, this was a study by Dr. Gardner where he said, I'm going to give people a very healthy low-fat diet, and I'm going to give them a very healthy low-carb diet. And let's see what the difference is. And guess what? There is no difference. Both groups eating a healthy low carb or a healthy low fat lost roughly 4 kilograms of weight over a course of a year. That's not that much. 10 pounds? Now, if you look at the studies, there were some people that did really well in the low carb, some people that did really well in the low fat, some people that did badly. My interest is if I took this person and put them over here, would they do well, or are these people just destined to fail no matter what diet they're doing? But that's a whole nother study. The bottom line is diets just don't seem to work very well. Now, do you know what the best studied diet ever, or the study that had the most weight loss ever, was the Broad study. And this was a whole food, plant-based diet. They gave the people an option of eating as much of these foods as you could possibly want, no calorie restriction whatsoever. You could eat all this you want, eat this limited, don't eat any of this. And people lost the most weight that has ever been recorded in a diet weight loss study in 1 year. So they lost about 12 pounds. That's good. 12 pounds is good. It's not going to cure our obesity problem, but this is treating obesity, right? There's a difference between treating and preventing, but that's all they lost. They lost about 12 grams. That's great. That's a great finding. It just isn't a lot. I like the idea of eating as much as you want of these diets. People have tried this for years and not being worried about carbs, right? As many of these carbs as you want. You can eat as much as you want. And unlike Dr. Willett, I tell my patients, eat Potatoes. I love potatoes. Potatoes are, we'll get to it, are very satiating. But you can't eat a potato and fat. You got to understand this difference. If you have fat, this is the, if you were there when I asked my question, if you've got fat in your muscle, fat causes diabetes. We've talked about this a little bit, not carbs. Carbs do not cause diabetes. The problem is if you have fat in your muscle cells, you can't process carbs. So if you've got a lot of fat in your muscle cells, you can't make insulin receptors. If you can't make insulin receptors, you can't get the sugar into the cell. So you get high sugar. People think because they have high sugar, the problem is that they ate carbs. Well, it's a problem if you eat carbs if you're insulin resistant. It's not if you're not insulin resistant. So my point is to make people insulin sensitive by eating a low-fat, moderate-fat, high-plant diet. Then you could eat a potato. Does that make sense? Okay. So this has been done for years. I mean, one of the best diets ever for diabetes and for weight loss was done by this guy, Dr. Walter Kempner. Do you know what that diet was? It was done in Duke. People came from all over the world to get treated by Dr. Kempner. It was the rice diet. He put people on nothing but rice and fruit. And this was back when they didn't have treatment for diabetes and hypertension. So you died if you got diabetes and hypertension. And he saved these people's lives, giving them nothing but rice and fruit. Now, that diet kind of went away because he lost his medical license, because he used to whip his patients if they didn't eat rice and fruit. So North Carolina didn't think that was good, and they took away his license. So I'm in North Carolina, so I had to put away my whip. But, I mean, it's true that eating unlimited, healthy, plant-based diet will help you lose weight. It's been studied multiple times. There have been multiple meta-analysis, and if you look at these studies, the weight loss, again, is roughly 4 kilograms, 10 pounds. It's pretty good. It's not fantastic. If you look at percentage of weight, it's pretty good. We know that if you lose 5% of your body weight, it is huge for your heart health. All right? So these people are all on plant-based diets, losing above that, doing very well. But it's not exactly the cure for obesity that my patient I showed you needs. But there have been many meta-analyses looking at plant-based diets, and they work. And so there are exceptions to the rule. I don't know if you guys know Josh Lajani. Josh had contacted me many years ago, looking like this. Had Josh come into my office, I would have probably told Josh, you need surgery. But Josh didn't do the surgery route. He decided to go plant-based and exercise, and this is Josh now. So there's always exceptions to rules, but we got to look a little bit beyond that. So in my existential crisis on what to tell people and what to do, and is it plant-based diet or is it a knife, you know, it's hard to say. I love the job that I have. I actually love being a surgeon because I go to work and I get to help people change people's lives. And you got to understand, I don't look at the surgery I do as cosmetic. It's not a cosmetic surgery. I'm not trying to make people look pretty. Frankly, sometimes they don't look pretty. They get hanging skin and the Shar-Pei look. It's not about looking skinny. It's about the fact that obesity kills people. It really does. All these different disease processes are caused by or made worse by obesity. And they all seem to get better with surgery. Predominantly diabetes, which we get an 85% cure in. In fact, in 1991, when we started releasing some of the data, the NIH Consensus Conference, where they got together to look at all the data, said, oh my gosh, weight loss surgery really does work and it is safe. And we did a meta-analysis at the time following 122,000 people, and the results were impressive. Operative mortality was extremely low. Weight loss was extremely high. Vitamin deficiencies were low. This is a Swedish obesity study. They studied people 30 years. I mean, we don't have diet studies that follow people 30 years. That's a pretty long study. And in that study, they took people in the control group. They were on a medically supervised diet. They were given medicines. They were given anything they can to get them to lose weight. The other group did surgery. The surgery group did better in just about every health aspect you look at, and they lived longer, considerably longer. In fact, they concluded at the end of the study that it is more dangerous to not get the surgery than to get the surgery, which sounds crazy when it's a big surgery that you can die from, but that's what the data showed. In fact, the surgery world is very, and I urge the nutrition world and any researchers out there to learn from this fact that we do is we study everything. We've got a program called MSQIP. Every patient I see, every patient any of my colleagues sees enters into a database. Every complication, every vitamin deficiency, every pound they lose gets recorded. And we study this stuff, and we update it continuously. And our updated stuff is pretty amazing, because while those other diets I showed you, people lose 5% of their weight, 10% of their weight, our patients lose, on average, about 75% of their excess weight, 75 to 80%. And in fact, in the 1960s, they noticed something very interestingly, that the answer to diabetes may in fact be the weight loss surgery, which is disturbing somewhat when you believe everything should be about food. And it's not to say it's not about food, I'll get to that. But the surgery is unbelievably good at preventing diabetes. So if you're obese, your risk of getting diabetes is very high. The surgery drops that tremendously. And not only does it drop the risk of getting diabetes, it treats it. People that have diabetes, and I'll go over why this happens, have a tremendous drop in their diabetic rate. 85% cure. Cure, that means off all medications 5 years out with a normal hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of diabetes. In this study here, they decided to check and test. They're going to do medical and lifestyle management versus a gastric bypass, and they're going to look at these different things at 5 years and look at the results. I mean, whether you're looking at diabetes, whether you're looking at weight, whether you're looking at LDL, there's no comparison. Same with this study, another lifestyle medicine study, and again, lifestyle medicine, the weight change is just not nearly as good as it is with the surgery groups. This study is one of the best studies I've ever seen, because this is, I didn't think we would be able to do this. They randomized people to either get a gastric bypass, a gastric sleeve, or a interventional study in Cleveland, an interventional lifestyle management. And they have one of the best interventional lifestyle management programs in the country, and yet the results were just terrible. Not only was the weight loss better with the weight loss surgery groups, and the cholesterol levels better, but the drop in medications were huge with the surgery groups, and the quality of life was much, much higher in the surgery group, much higher. With their main outcome that they were looking for is to get an A1C less than 6, which means you're not diabetic anymore, and you could see the Roux-en-Y group, half of them achieved that. Not only that, it decreases the rate of heart disease in half. So this is an interesting concept, because in my practice, when I was in Houston, I practiced with my father. And I had a plant-based program, because I'm board certified in medical management and in surgical management. So some people I treat medically and some people I treat surgically based on some of their factors in their history, but also on what they want to do. And so I was starting to randomize people and see, well, what if I said to someone, I want you to do the plant-based diet instead of the surgery? And we were looking at the results, and my father was kind of an old curmudgeon. I mean, think of an old grumpy surgeon. And he's looking over the results, and he goes, you know what I think? And I was like, what? What do you think? He's like, I think you're committing malpractice. Which, right? Because I'm telling people to eat salads, that's malpractice. And he said, you're withholding from them a surgery that could benefit them way more than you're benefiting them with the plant-based diet. You see where my existential crisis comes from? My dad. But when you look at, again, we got to think globally. Like globally, no question. We need, and I'll tell you why we need to get people eating plants and how that could prevent obesity long term. But when I'm looking at Marcus here, I got to think a little bit differently. And the problem is a lot of people will look at Marcus and think obesity is not a disease. In fact, when they poll people, most people think obesity isn't a disease. They think we're taking people to the operating room while they're eating double cheeseburgers. Or they think, you know, it's not that diabetes, heart disease, and obesity run in your family, it's that no one runs in your family. As if, you know, if Marcus ran, it would all get better. Or this idiot who was like, dear obese PhD applicants, if you didn't have the willpower to stop eating carbs, you won't have the willpower to do a dissertation. Can you believe the guy tweeted that? I mean, first of all, thinking that carbs are the problem. So he obviously doesn't know what he's talking about, but what a rude statement. Imagine what Marcus would feel like reading that. Would that help? Does shaming someone help them lose weight? And of course, he has to offer his sincere apologies for his idiotic statement, but he still lost his job. But the thing is, you got to understand that the justice is served. The simple act of saying I'm hungry is not so simple, all right? It's not that simple. We always think, right, what happens? You go on a diet and you do well in the beginning, right? Someone offers you a cake and you say, I don't want that cake, I'm on a diet. But 3 weeks later, someone offers you a cake and you're like, oh my God, that looks so good. Is that Betty Crocker? And next thing you know, you're eating cake. And then what do you say? Because I talk to patients all the time, right? what happened? Well, I failed the diet. I failed the diet. Did they fail the diet? They think of it as I didn't have the willpower to do the diet. Okay, willpower is a thought process, right? I am thinking I'm going to will my way through this. That comes from this part of the brain, all right? Hunger is determined by this part of the brain, the hypothalamus and the brainstem, the ancient brain, the brain that formed a gazillion years ago, right? The brain that formed in times of feast or famine, all right? We have this big, huge, stretchable stomach. When I cut that stomach out, if we stain it for elastic, it's got elastic fibers in it. It's made to stretch, all right? Now, whether you believe in evolution or intelligent design, that stomach wasn't designed for us to get our money's worth at a buffet, all right? It was designed so that we can eat when food wasn't around, because food usually wasn't around, all right? Winter was coming. Now winter is here and we could go to McDonald's at 2 in the morning. But those kind of factors work against us now. So what may have been protective for Marcus a gazillion years ago is no longer protective for Marcus. But his body still thinks, his body's still designed for that feast or famine. And it's a very complex thing. Hunger is extremely complex. There are all kinds of variables that fit into this very primitive part of the brain. The part of the brain, by the way, that determines how much you breathe, how fast your heart rate is. You could hold your breath for a while, but then you're going to breathe. You could try to change your heart rate, but it's going to keep going. You could try not to eat, but you're going to fail eventually. And it's because this is a very primitive, protective part of the brain. And there's feeding into it. Ghrelin hormone, a hormone that comes from the stomach that we'll talk about. PYY from the intestines. The vagus nerve. Fat secretes something called leptin we're going to talk about. And people have different responses to this, and a lot of it is genetically encoded. There's definitely genes that predispose us towards being overweight. If you look at twin studies where they took twins, oh, I've got 57 minutes left, right? Okay, right? Oh, good. I thought I had 3 minutes left. I was like, oh my God. I've been going on too long. Okay, when you look at twin studies, they took twins that were separated at birth, grew up in different environments, and then they looked at them. If you look at monozygotic twins, identical twins, it doesn't make a difference what their environment was, right? Even in a shared environment, it didn't make a difference. But look at this. In a shared environment, dizygotic twins, non-identical twins, look at the differences. In fact, in twin studies, weight is the most inherited gene we have on par with height, more than hair color and eye color and things like that. And there's many genes that we're looking at now. A lot of it we don't know yet, but we know that there's big differences between people. We've done these functional MRI studies. If you look at a normal person's brain, I don't like to say normal, a normal weight person's brain, the red indicates dopamine receptors. If you got a lot of dopamine receptors and you eat food and it stimulates dopamine, you get a like, I just ate. I'm fine. I'm good, right? I had my salad. I'm good. Now, I want you to look at a brain of an obese person. Where are the dopamine receptors? They don't have it. And what happens then? They're desperate for something to stimulate that brain to say, I'm satisfied. They don't get that satisfaction. And it looks a lot like the brain of a cocaine addict or of an alcoholic. And even worse yet, whether it's genes, it also may be what's called epigenetics. Have you guys heard of epigenetics? What mom ate while baby is in the tummy could have a big difference too. We know that certain foods that mom eats can affect the genes and the way the genes are activated in the baby. And get this. This blows my mind. They know this about smoking and they're thinking it about obesity too. That what mom eats or smokes affects the baby, but if it's a female baby, it also affects the female baby's eggs. So that when that female baby grows up and has a baby, that baby is affected by what its grandmother did when she was pregnant, which is crazy. So before we go blaming patients, maybe we need to blame their grandparents. It goes back. It's very complicated. And a lot of it goes to different kind of coding. So what are these genes coding for? Well, they're coding for these different hormones. Some people produce more ghrelin, which makes you hungry. Ghrelin's an interesting hormone made by the stomach. If you start fasting, your ghrelin level continually goes up. If you go on a diet, the ghrelin level continues to go up and you become very hungry. Now, interestingly, if I do a weight loss surgery where I cut out part of the stomach, that ghrelin level drops dramatically. So when people have had weight loss surgery, it's not that they're forced not to eat, they just don't feel like eating because they have a lot lower ghrelin level. Leptin is another very interesting hormone. Our fat cells secrete a hormone called leptin. And that leptin, again, goes to that primitive part of the brain. Leptin is supposed to tell the brain, okay, we got fat on store, we're good. All right, we're good. We could handle a winter of fasting. If you start losing leptin, because you're losing fat, so you go on a diet, you start losing fat, less fat cells, less leptin. Less leptin, the brain says, oh my God, I don't have enough fat, I need to get the person eating again. There's another hormone called PYY. Again, it increases hunger. And so there's many different factors. In fact, your gut microbiome may be a big factor in how hungry you are, how much you eat, or even what your metabolism is. I don't know if you guys have heard about transfusions? Do you know what that is? It's this idea of taking someone else's feces and ingesting it to change your microbiome. Now, yeah, this is happening. Wonderful world of science. Right now, the only indication for it is to treat a bacteria called C. diff, which happens in hospitals quite frequently now, is becoming antibiotic resistant. So there was a case where there was a thin woman who had C. diff, so she got a transfusion, and she got it from her daughter-in-law who was overweight, and 6 months later, she was overweight. So now with transfusions, you can't get it from someone who's overweight. But it's interesting because there may be a lot with the microbiome, and I'll get into a little bit later, on how it affects our weight. Interestingly, in some studies, now these are, albeit mainly in rat studies, but with a gastric bypass, there's a great increase in the diversity of microbiome afterwards. And they think that maybe this increase in microbiome may be part of the reason the surgery works so effectively. But back to this idea, like when you think of an overweight patient and you think, okay, they're overweight because it's their choice and it's their mind, I want to draw you to this study because there was a medication that came out called rimonabant. Now, rimonabant works on the endocannabinoid receptors, the CBD receptors in the brain, and it blocks them. I guess they saw that people smoking pot got the munchies, so what if we block the munchies? And so this drug was extremely effective. It takes away your will to eat. Now, it didn't get FDA approval because it also takes away your will to live. But it had some interesting studies because they put people on either a placebo, a sugar pill, or rimonabant at 5 milligrams, rimonabant at 20 milligrams. They don't know what they're getting, right? They're getting a pill. They didn't tell them anything about diet or exercise. Look at the differences between the 20 milligram, the 5 milligram, and the none. That's a pretty, they're not doing anything different. They're just getting a pill. Did they all of a sudden get willpower? Or is there some kind of chemical problem that they have, a disease that we are treating? Now, what's interesting is on this rimonabant group, they're doing great. We're going to slip them a placebo right here. Look what happens. All of a sudden, they're lazy again? There's something more to this. And that's why it's so hard to portion control. And it's so hard, I like this meme. 12 o'clock, I'm going to save this sandwich for later, 12:06. I'm going to finish that sandwich now. It's hard for us to do these things because our brain is working at a very fundamental level. Our body's working against us. Now, it can't all be genes, right? Because we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're getting more and more obese. So it can't just be our genes. We have to take some blame in this, right? I beat anorexia. There are twin studies that show this genetic correlation, but there's also the interaction with the environment, and we got a terrible environment. And like I showed you earlier, we're eating more and more of everything. And the worst part about it is we are favoring the foods that are most likely to play into this genetic predisposition to obesity. The USDA government recommends a pretty decent plate of, fruits, vegetables, protein, dairy, for what reason? Because the dairy guys pay. But anyway, look, pretty decent plate. But do we put money towards fruits, vegetables? No. The vast majority of our money goes to the protein and dairy. Very little goes to fruit and vegetables. So we don't put our money where our mouth is. And that leads to this. A burger should cost about $12. That's what a burger should cost. But instead it costs 99 cents because of subsidies that go to the food that the cows eat and things like that. Whereas, a salad costs $5. And there's a lot of marketing. Here I am with Ronald McDonald. Oh, this picture was funny. I was about to run the Chicago Marathon, and Ronald McDonald was there. I was like, what is Ronald doing here? And I think he thought I was going to take a picture, like, look, I'm with Ronald. I was like, look at this idiot. But we just have such a weird conception now that Ronald McDonald's at a marathon. You know, it's so pervasive in our, Coca-Cola is like all about exercise now. It just, the way we look at exercise is so weird. Look at these guys taking the escalator. I see people, in the gym. They sit all day, then they go to the gym and they sit on the exercise by reading a book. And of course, we're all stressed and we're unhappy, and that fits into it a lot. I have an on-staff psychologist for my patients because everybody has got childhood trauma and depression and stress, and this really factors into eating disorders. And it's interesting to me that there are disparities just in zip codes. Like, you could look at a zip code and know what the weight of that zip code is likely to be. Zip codes vary based on, is it a food desert, how many parks are there, how many fast food restaurants. So there is a huge environmental factor to this. So let's go back to Marcus. Marcus comes to my office. What am I going to tell him now that I know all this? Am I going to tell him eat less, move more? That's what everybody tells people. Eat less, move more. I mean, I want him to eat less and I want him to move more, but that is not a prescription. All right, that doesn't work, telling people to eat less, move more. If you guys remember The Biggest Loser? I took these people, they told them to eat a lot less and move a lot more. What's interesting is they lost a lot of weight, oppressive amount of weight, but they put it all back on. And Johns Hopkins studied them. And what's interesting to me in the study is that while they lost a lot of weight, they put it back on, but they kept exercising. So 6 years later, they're still exercising almost as much as they did on The Biggest Loser. But look at their metabolic rate. Their metabolic rate has dropped considerably since before The Biggest Loser. They were burning about 2,600 calories. After The Biggest Loser, 1,900 calories. 6 years later, 1,900 calories. That never got better. So their metabolic rate has changed dramatically. And this idea that exercise is going to cure obesity, it's good for helping maintain. But they did a good study where they looked at Americans versus the HASDA. The HASDA are very healthy and lean, and they're eating a predominantly plant-based gathered diet with some hunted food. And they walk a lot, but they don't walk that much more than us. In fact, when you look at the blue zones, they don't walk that much more than us. Physical activity is certainly good for your health, without a doubt, but it's not a great weight loss mechanism. And why is that? I mean, people burn 700 calories, and they're like, okay, that deserves a margarita. And then that's the end of it. And the other thing is people do a really bad job. I have done everything to help people lose weight. If there is something out there, I've done it. And I used to have the most sophisticated office you've ever seen. People would come in and they'd have to blow into a machine so I could measure their metabolic rate. I'd have them sit in what's called a bod pod so I could get exact measurements. I would have them detail everything they ate. And the more I tried to say, I want you eating 1,323.1 calories, like I had the scientific formula. And the more scientific I tried to get about it, the worse they did. And there's many reasons for that. People don't know how to count calories very well. There's a lot of things they miss. There's a lot of things those apps miss. And you can see in this study, people were underreporting calories like crazy. And there's many reasons for that. Look at Pam cooking spray. Pam cooking spray. How many calories in Pam cooking spray? 0. How much fat? 0. No fat, no calories in Pam cooking spray. How is that possible? It's all fat. Look at right, exactly. Look at the serving size. 1/4 of a second of a spray. That's the serving size. That's how they could tell you it's 0 calories. So patients are like, 0 calories. Oh, And then they go on Weight Watchers, and Weight Watchers is amazing to me because it's just like you get this I'm going to eat 10 points right now, then I'll skip lunch and I'll eat 12 points later so that I could save 5 points. That body doesn't work like that, It's not going to work. Weight Watchers and Atkins are the most commonly performed diets before that people get weight loss surgery. They've been done a gazillion times. I think we really got to think outside the box a little bit here. We got to look at food differently for sure. What comes with a steak? Cancer, heart disease, and your choice of rice pilaf. We have to look at, what our number one recommendation is when it comes to food and eat more protein. Everyone thinks protein's for weight loss. Well, some people think I'm going to eat protein to gain weight. Protein shakes are sold as weight gainers and as weight losers, which is weird. But we eat more protein, especially more animal protein, than any other country in the world. How's it working for us? We're the most overweight country in the world. We spend the most money on disease processes, on healthcare. Definitely leave the world in weight. And what's interesting to me, the EPIC data study, which is probably the biggest study ever on epidemiologic study on long-term health and diet, showed that the number one food associated with weight gain over time was actually meat, specifically chicken, which is the food that my patients swear is what helps them lose weight. You got to understand, when I see a patient and I look at their food log, why are you gaining weight? Because I had a Snickers bar yesterday. Okay, but you had eggs and bacon for breakfast, chicken for lunch, and chicken for dinner. Yeah, that's healthy, right? It's the Snickers bar that did it. They don't add they figure that the calories from the chicken and the eggs are fine, but they obviously aren't. And if you look at the healthiest populations in the world, if you look at the blue zones, they're eating a predominantly plant-based diet that's actually very low in protein. And if you look at the EPIC data study, the vegans have the lowest weight. And you look at the Adventist Health study, the vegans are the only people with a normal BMI, a normal body mass index. And what are they doing? They're eating a predominantly plant-based, high carbohydrate, low protein diet, very similar, though lower fat, than the Mediterranean diet. No matter what you look at, if you eat a higher protein diet, especially animal protein, because animal protein's higher in leucine. There I went. I got into protein. I was not going to get into protein, but we'll get into it shortly. Animal protein is high in leucine. Leucine stimulates IGF-1. IGF-1 is a growth factor, all right? It's going to make you grow. And so that is a factor. And of course, animal protein changes your gut biome. I often wondered, what if we took a whole bunch of like vegans and we made vegan stool pellets and gave it to people? Maybe that would help them lose weight. I don't know if they would take it, served daily. But there's definitely changes in the microbiome of vegans. Now, is it the microbiome that's making people lose weight, or is it the fact that they're vegan that changes their microbiome? What came first, the chicken or the egg? There's some evidence that if you eat a plant-based diet, you increase the kind of bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids called butyrate. And if you have butyrate, that does help with satiety factors. And so that's interesting. Certainly, eating a plant-based diet, there are many factors in a gastric bypass that lower some of the hormones that create hunger. And the same thing does happen with the plant-based diet, just to a lesser degree. Of course, Brenda talked today about calorie density. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's really important. We got to look at calorie density. Calorie counting doesn't work. Calorie density works pretty well. Instead of telling my patients, I want you to eat this many calories, I tell them, you could eat as much of this as you want. One of my patients said, no way. You're lying. I was like, I don't care how many apples. She goes, okay, I'm going to eat as many apples as I can to prove you wrong. And one day she ate 6 apples. And when she came to me a month later, she'd actually lost weight. She's like, damn it. You're right. I could eat as many apples as I want. And then I tell them, watch it here and really watch it over here. I mean, I don't mind if you have some nuts, but, watch it. This is very high calorie density. And a lot of this has to do with fiber. The lower calorie density foods have higher fiber. And as Dr. Willett showed, higher fiber is going to help with satiety. If you look at this study where they had people eat different foods and measure their satiety, what is the most satiating food a human being can eat? Potatoes. The most satiating food, which is why I get angry when people say bad things about my lovely potatoes. There is an excellent study done by this lady named Barbara Rolls, and she took people and she said, look, all that matters is this calorie density. If we could feel, because there's a nerve in your stomach called the vagus nerve, and if it gets a stretch receptor to it, if it feels stretched, it tells the brain, okay, we got food in there, we're all right. So she looked at this and she said, I'm going to give people the same amount of food, but one food's going to have 85% the calories of the other, and one's going to have 75% of the calories. So the energy intake from each is going to be less. The same volume of food, just less calories for each one. And guess what? People lost more weight on less calories, obviously, but they didn't feel any different. They felt like they were getting the same bowl of soup as the person with 100% calorie in it. And how did she do it? She just added more vegetables. She added more fiber. The more fiber she added, the lower the energy density. And that worked. And her book's excellent, The Volumetrics Weight Control Plan. This is spread. Now there's things called like the DASH diet. I don't know if you guys have heard about the DASH diet. It always gets the most press. It was started by some of Dr. Willett's partners They actually had studied the effects of a vegetarian diet and found that a vegetarian diet worked fantastic, but they didn't feel they could tell people to go vegetarian because they wouldn't do it. Also, they created the DASH diet, which is fairly balanced, lots of fruits, vegetables, and grains, but it still has some meat and dairy. This is all great. This is great for treating the population. People should do a DASH diet, a vegetarian diet, but what do we do with the individual patient that is suffering from obesity? And sometimes surgeons are made fun of, but a chance to cut is sometimes a chance to cure. And you got to understand, we don't go into these surgeries lightly. We don't say, oh, you're overweight, let's go to the operating room right now. We put people through a whole pre-operative workup plan. We make them lose weight beforehand. We have them go on diets. And again, I put them on a plant-based diet. I talk to them the benefits of calorie, the same things I'm telling you right now. And we found that it doesn't really matter if they lose weight beforehand that much, but afterwards it matters. They do really well once I start telling them about plant-based diet. There's several surgeries that we do, just to touch on what we're doing when we do surgery. We no longer do the lap band. The lap band, we wrap the band around the top part of the stomach. This was almost like forced bulimia. People would eat, wouldn't go through. And you gotta understand, we can make that band tighter or looser, but if I make it loose enough to fit the broccoli I want them to eat, guess what's going through there? Cookies. You're going to fly through there. And actually, funny enough, the Ghrelin hormone increases in these patients because we're not doing anything to the hormones, so they can't eat as much. Their Ghrelin level goes up, their PYY goes up, they're hungry. So they're eating ice cream because ice cream slides through. So this surgery just didn't do very well. Gastric bypass is the old tried and true. What we're doing in the bypass is we're cutting and separating this little piece of the stomach from that part of the stomach, and we're bringing up a piece of intestine and joining it up here. Now what happens with that, they can't eat as much because the stomach's smaller, but because we're bypassing food from the stomach, Ghrelin level drops. By having food bypass and come over to this part of the intestine, it increases a hormone called GLP-1, which is a strong treater of diabetes. These people, their diabetes gets better regardless of their weight, whether they lose weight. The PYY still increases a little bit, but not as much. Sleeve gastrectomy, a little bit different. We're cutting out, we're basically, we look at this as a vestigial organ. This is from the days of where you had to eat a lot, so because there was going to be a fast, so we cut this part of the stomach out, leaving just a thin stomach. That part of the stomach secretes Ghrelin, so Ghrelin drops. GLP-1 goes up a little bit, and this is pretty effective. Duodenal switch this is a malabsorption procedure. It kind of takes food and puts it almost all the way at the colon before it gets digestive juices, so you just don't absorb as much. This is the most effective surgery for weight loss, but there's a lot of vitamin deficiencies, so it's not done as much. In general, in the right hands with the right people, this is a very safe surgery. There's very low risks of complications. People do pretty well. There is some weight regain over time, but it's not weight regain back to what they were before. And I would say that my experience is like this because instead of telling them to eat a high-protein diet like a lot of my colleagues do, I'm very big on obviously a whole food plant-based diet. So let's go back to my buddy, Marcus. After knowing all this, Marcus and I sat down and talked. And I said, Marcus, I could do this surgery on you, but it is just a tool, all right? Lifestyle's the important part. The tool is there to overcome the fact that your dad, your grandfather, your uncles were all obese. The tool is to combat the fact that you were in fat camp since you were 5 years old. The tool is to get there so that you're not hungry and have that constant feel like you can't get satisfied, which he told me he had. But you still got to do the right things. You still got to move. We got to get exercise. I need you eating plants. And he said, I promise you I will do that all, doctor. And in fact, if I do it, you got to promise me you will do a triathlon with me because I'm going to do a triathlon. Imagine a 500-pound guy telling you he's going to do a triathlon with you. Well, here we are a year later, finishing a triathlon together. This was an Olympic triathlon, which is it's a mile swim, 25-mile bike, and a 6-mile run. That wasn't enough for him, so he went on to do an Ironman. Yeah, and here he is. He's finishing an Ironman. He always carries a picture of what he used to look like with him to just remind himself. So, yeah. And here we are together afterwards. He's now a plant-based Ironman. So you really can't make these changes. And the thing is, this is not like an isolated one-off patient. I mean, I see these kind of huge changes. It's the joy in my life to see this every day. I get to do it every day. So it is an existential crisis going between this like very Western medicine versus this very more Eastern idea of food as medicine. And I have to battle with that daily, but I love what I do. I try as best I can, both with my patients and publicly when I give talks, to try to take all that information that's out there and distill it into a little bit of knowledge and wisdom, and to understand that really the important thing is plants. It is fruit and vegetables. When a patient comes in, and this is a patient who was asking me why they were gaining weight and they're eating eggs and turkey and turkey and turkey. And I was like, you are what you eat. You turkey. So, and I don't tell people to go vegan. I try to tell them to shift the plate, to flip it. You know, make the meat the side dish if you have to. But the emphasis needs to be on the plants and the fruits and the vegetables. My general recommendations are the things you've already heard here before. No grazing, try to eat the same time every day, eat over a 10-hour period, get 10,000 steps, 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Journaling and goal setting, we do all these things with our patients. I definitely focus on a pyramid like Joel Fuhrman's. Eat as much of this as you want so you don't have to calorie restrict, you don't ever have to be desperate. I try to teach them to make easy meals that are cheap. Oatmeal and berries, big salads that don't just look like iceberg and ranch dressing, but are colorful, healthy snack foods. You know, we talk a lot, I mean, everybody here is interested in organic and all that stuff, and I definitely think organic's better. But when I'm dealing with someone from Appalachia, I got to give them some canned foods. You know, I got to give them frozen vegetables. I got to do whatever I can to get them so that they're eating something better than Bojangles fried chicken. And so those are the kind of things that I try to teach to my patients. So it's a kind of combination between Western and Eastern thought processes and ideas. I mean, certainly I hope in the future this is what it's like. Doctor, I don't feel well. I'm not sure why. I want you to meditate for 20 minutes twice a day, exercise for at least 30 minutes, avoid processed food, eat plenty of organic fruits and vegetables, spend more time in nature, less indoors, stop worrying about things you can't control, ditch your TV, and see me in 3 weeks. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. I guess we have some time for questions, right? I finished early for the first time in my life. Questions? I can't see, so does someone have like a microphone?
Yes,
and they could...
yes.
Okay,
Coming.
Here we go.
Wait for me, please.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
So, all the women in my family suffered from obesity, including my grandmother. I struggled for 20 years. I was an obese little girl, an obese teenager. And now for 20 years, I've maintained a 90-pound weight loss.
Amazing.
And one of the things, thank you. One of the things that I've learned, I have satiety, the gift of satiety. I eat pretty much a nutritarian diet. Mm-hmm. The only time that I lose it is when I'm angry, lonely, jealous, you know, overstressed, going through grief. I lost many of my loved ones. You know, so it's such, and the foundation for me has been meditation. Mm-hmm.
That's great.
A conscious contact with a higher power that's helped me, you know, in many ways. And, you know, I guess I just wanted to stand up and let people know that I work with people all the time who use meditation as their foundation and a plant-based diet, and watching emotions and making a distinction between the illusion of hunger when these emotions come up and, you know, working with that. Yeah. And it's a way of restoring people back to their true selves as well as their ideal weight.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, my next book is almost exactly about that. I'm looking at people that have been able to lose weight without anything, without surgery, without anything, and what did they do to be successful? What were their, how did they break away from this? Like, I kind of paint a negative picture that if you're 500 pounds, there's no way you're going to lose weight. But what about the people that did? That's my next book. What can I learn from those people? What did they do? And I like that meditation's one of them because that's something I haven't put in there yet. But I've been trying to meditate. I did a 10-day silent meditation retreat, but I lasted 7 days. I just could not do it. I had to quit. That was harder than an Ironman. That was, yeah. Yes?
I have a different kind of question. It's for a friend who's trying to do the plant-based diet, but she's actually underweight. Is there anything other than eating more carrots that somebody can do?
Carrots, no. It's oils. you want to start going up that calorie density chain. So you want to start, instead of eating the lower calorie density stuff, it's nuts, seeds, oils, and a little bit more denser carbohydrate like potatoes and things added into it. Yeah. Yes.
One of your recommendations, you had it on the screen, but you went over it very quickly, was to eat over a 10-hour period.
Yes.
How important is time management in the whole scheme of things?
Yeah. I don't know. The evidence right now, it's funny enough because I just got back, social media kills me. You guys see me get angry on there. I get angry because I have such scientific discussions with my team, and then I go on social media and someone's like, "You're wrong, you're right," and they don't know what they're talking about. We had a really good discussion about this. We were reviewing all the literature. There's pretty strong evidence that time-restricted eating, which is different than intermittent fasting. So time-restricted eating is, I'm going to eat over a 10-hour period, I'm going to eat over an 8 to 10-hour period, does work pretty well. I think part of it has to do with something you kind of mentioned on, which is I try to teach patients to understand these hunger cues and to understand that you're not going to die if you're a little bit hungry. We're such a culture now that, oh my God, I'm hungry, I better eat right now or I will die. That's not true. And once you kind of learn that that's not true, you tend to eat less calories. It's not that time-restricted eating, that there's some kind of magical formula where all of a sudden weight falls off. You just tend to eat less calories when you do that. You tend not to graze as much. You tend not to nighttime feed. There's definitely evidence that eating food earlier in the day. I think Dr. Greger's had some videos out recently where I didn't see the actual video, but the beginning of it was like, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper, which I love that. I kind of flip the breakfast and lunch a little bit. I tell people to do a light breakfast, big lunch, and then very light dinner and nothing eating after that. There is some evidence to support it. It's not the end-all be-all, but there is evidence to support it. But here's the caveat. So I was all about supporting that until I sat down. I told you we have a pretty comprehensive group at our weight management center, and my psychologists were all over me because we have a lot of people, obviously, with eating disorders, and they feel like these time-restricted eatings and intermittent fastings are the new age way of creating anorexia. I don't know that I agree with them, but there was a 2008 article that definitely showed that people that practiced intermittent fasting had an increased rate of eating disorders later. However, they were following intermittent fasting, which is different than time-restricted eating. That's a longer period of fasting, like a whole day off, things like that. The evidence is there, but it's not there so strongly that I think it's the absolute end-all be-all. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Davis. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about a case and see what you can tell me what you know about the evidence of weight loss. I'm a community nutritionist. There's this guy's about 50, 60 pounds overweight. He's been really excellent at moving to a plant-based diet. Lost about 10 pounds, but and he exercises, walks his dog morning and night, and then does other rigorous exercise about 2 to 3 times a week. But works in a very high stress work environment, very sedentary during the day. So just can't seem to break past losing this 10 pounds despite being very compliant. The only other thing I see in the food log is that he eats a lot of nuts as his snacks at his desk for satiety. Yeah. So I wanted to, I realize you can't give medical advice, but just based on that type of scenario, would it be microbiome? Would it be the nuts, or would it be cortisol? Like I keep hearing about the cortisol.
All of those things, yeah. They all contribute. So cortisol is definitely a problem. We see it a lot in people that exercise too much with high cortisol levels. High protein can cause high cortisol levels if he's really trying to focus on protein. Liquid calories, a lot of people think protein shakes are good for them, so they're getting these easily absorbed calories. Nuts are high calorie density. There was a study in that Predimed study that Dr. Willett referenced. Increasing nut consumption did not seem to be associated with increased weight, but I don't believe it. And it was funded by the Nut Almonds Association, but I don't. It's not because they funded it that was the finding. I just think it was too broad of a study group in order to. It wasn't a real. We're going to give you nuts and you not, and follow, and everything else is going to be held equal. I think nuts are very high calorie density, and so if he's constantly snacking on nuts, that's why I like a very, very set eating time. Like this is something I have found, both in myself and with my patients. Doing something 99% is hard. Doing something 100% is easier. Meaning, if I've got I am going to eat at 1 o'clock and I'm going to eat at 3 o'clock and that's it. Like I'm going to have my snack at 3. I'm hungry at 2. I'm eating at 3. There's no question. But if I got 90, well, most of the time I'm going to do that. Then I'm constantly like, well, maybe this is my 1% where I do. And then you end up snacking all day. And so snacking could be a real problem with that. It's an easy way to get calories in without doing it. And then, of course, this whole idea that people just cannot count calories. They do not get the idea of what a proper portion size is or how many calories are in certain foods. And so when we have a patient like that, we go through all of these things with them. We try to get them less concerned about exercising and more concerned about how many steps you get in a day. So we use pedometers, wanting them to get 10,000 steps, however you can get it, because there's been a lot of studies that sitting all day and then going and doing a 30-minute workout is almost worthless. Not worthless, but not as good as getting 10,000 steps a day. We want you to get 10,000 steps a day. We go over what are you eating specifically, take pictures of it. Let me see the pictures of the food. We could cut calories here. Sometimes all you need is just a little shift of 100 to 200 calories a day, and then all of a sudden you got weight loss going on. But these are hard issues to deal with. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for the work that you do. I love your compassion and your passion.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question about cool sculpting. I have a lot of friends that have been talking about it. I don't know if it's one of those fad type things or if in fact there's some science behind it. But if you have any information that you can share, I'd appreciate it.
It's completely worthless. It's worthless unless you are pretty darn lean. Like you're of the 6-pack, you've got a 4-pack and you want those extra 2-pack. Then it will work on like a small little area. What it is this little machine, it sucks your fat into it, and then it freezes it, and it breaks down the fat cells. And it works if you got a little tiny, I got a little bit here, but I see people coming in like they've got this much. It's not gonna do anything for that. The other thing, it was a pretty interesting study done on liposuction. So they took a group of people, and they had them lose 20 pounds. They lost it was 20 or 40 pounds. No, it must have been 20 pounds. It was 20 pounds with weight loss surgery versus a group of people that lost 20 pounds with liposuction. And the liposuction group had almost no effect on their metabolic health, whereas the 20 pounds lost with the weight loss surgery had tremendous effects. Well, why is that? The fat in the subcutaneous tissue is not that metabolic. When we want people to lose fat, I want them to lose fat from their insides. I want to cool sculpt their liver, but I can't. So cool sculpting the subcutaneous tissue is purely a cosmetic procedure, and it is only for people with the slightest bit of excess fat. Yeah.
Thank you for your passion for caring, Doctor.
Sure.
Dr. Greger states 40 minutes of exercise a day. Dr. Popper states 60 minutes of exercise.
Yeah.
What's your take on
The research is actually 60 minutes, but there's a difference between the research and my patients. And I know that, they're not going to do 60 minutes 5 days a week. They're just not going to do it. 300 minutes a week is what the research is showing is the most effective. But if I could get them to do 150 minutes a week and get them at least interested in the exercise and out moving, it's at least some benefit. So I start with that and gradually improve based on the assessment I get from the patient every time I see them as to how they're doing with their exercise. Yeah, more is better to a point, not until, sometimes more is too much, but 300 is probably better than 150, but 150 is better than none.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a question about weight loss and therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of friends that are morbidly obese, and some of them have had bariatric bypass, but I keep on telling them I don't believe in the bariatric bypass, that they should go and see a therapist to figure out why they overeat.
Right.
Like some of them are emotional eaters and getting this is a quick fix, but they're still 600 pounds.
Right.
Like,
So-
what do you feel about therapy?
Yeah. Oh, well, therapy's huge. We do it in our clinic. I would say, I would caution, you can't really say I don't believe in weight loss surgery. This isn't a belief thing. It's facts, right? I presented the data. The data is, there's no question on the data. 30-year data. There's more science to this than there is to global warming or any of the other things we talk about. The science is that weight loss surgery works. Now, it's not going to work in everybody. These are percentages. There's no doubt that there's psychological problems. There's no doubt that there's trauma. In fact, there's a ton of our patients with traumatic issues. All of our patients go through a preoperative psychological workup. So no one could have surgery without psychological workup. Anybody that's got issues has to go through a psychological, I hate the term, but boot camp. And then we do a lot post-operatively with them. So it's a very important part of being successful. So you could get the surgery and you could do everything pretty well, but then have all these psychological problems that cause you to self-sabotage. And there's a lot of patients, the psychological problems after surgery are really interesting. Like a lot of people, most people, it's like, oh my God, I feel fantastic. Look at these great clothes. Some people, it's like, oh my God, I was raped as a child and now men are paying attention to me and it's very uncomfortable. I'm going to eat to put back on some of that fat so people aren't paying attention to me. I hear all these things. People noticing me bothers, all these kind of things. And so self-sabotage is a real issue. So weight loss surgery, and not just weight loss surgery, any weight loss needs to be a holistic approach. It can't just be diet. It can't just be exercise. It's got to be sleep. It's got to be what you're eating. It's got to be how much you move. It's got to be what your stress level is. Are you meditating? All these things, this holistic lifestyle approach to be successful. Yeah.
Hello, doctor.
Yes, where am
Over
I
here.
talking? Oh, there, okay.
Hello. I'm just wondering what you would say the evidence is around supplements after weight loss surgery if you're eating a whole foods plant-based diet. Do you find your patients still need to take as many supplements?
It depends which surgery. The gastric bypass, because we're bypassing part of the intestine, they tend to need to still take. But my patients that eat more of the way I want them to eat seem to require it less. I haven't really I haven't taken my data and looked at it analytically, so just offhand I would say they tend to need less vitamins than, funny enough, B12 deficiency seems to be way more prominent in my meat eaters than my plant eaters. Now, that may be because my plant eaters tend to be more compliant with my recommendations, and I do recommend taking a B12 supplement, so they're taking their supplements. The meat eaters aren't being compliant with my diet recommendations, so they're not compliant with so it's not really a scientific statement, but I get a lot of B12 deficient meat eaters, I'll tell you that much.
You said that you hate macronutrients, and it's a really big thing now with like fitness influencers and on social media. They're always talking about macronutrients.
They love macronutrients.
Yeah, they love their macronutrients.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if what are your opinions on proportions? Do you think there should be any, or more focus about eating whole foods?
Oh yeah, it should be all whole foods. I just can't, because people don't. I mean, what is steak? It's protein, but it's also a bunch of other stuff. What is bacon? Well, there's protein in bacon. Does that make bacon good? I'll tell a patient, I want you to eat an apple for a snack, and then they come back and see me. I had this one lady, they're eating like a protein shake, and I'm like, I told you to eat an apple. Yeah, but an apple doesn't have protein. I'm like, oh my God. I had one patient who was a really smart. She was a NASA scientist, a rocket scientist, and she was from Ghana, and she came in. I do not understand why I have weight, because I eat very healthy. And I'm like, okay, well, let me look at your food. I was like, well, what do you think it is? She goes, well, I think it's my carb intake. And I'm looking at her diet, and it's like that other one I showed you. It's just like eggs, chicken, steak. I'm like, but you didn't even write down a single carb on this list. And she's like, oh yeah, well, I'm from Ghana, and about, twice a week, I'll go over to my friends from Ghana's house, and we have a traditional Ghana meal, and it's very high in carbs. I'm like, so you're telling me that the Ghana meal is the reason you're overweight, that you eat once or twice a week? Yes. I'm like, have you ever been to Ghana? Now, I knew something about Ghana that she might not have known, because I study obesity. They have the least obesity in the entire world. So I said, have you been back to Ghana? And she was like, yes. I was like, were there any obese people there? She's like, oh no, they were looking at me like I was like something out of a movie. I was the most overweight person there. I was like, and they eat Ghana food? She's like, yeah. And I was like, and what happened while you were there? She's like, well, I was there a couple months. And I was like, what happened to your weight? She was like, actually, I lost weight. I was like, aha. And then it clicked to her, wait a second, it's not the Ghana meal. So, that's the problem with macronutrients is we start to like label foods good and bad based on macronutrients, but nothing's a protein and nothing's a carb. They're all mixes of this. The other thing that kills me is when I say carbs are good, people think I'm saying that donuts are good. No, there's more fat in a donut than there's a carb. A donut's not a carb, just like a pizza's not a carb. So I can't stand the macronutrient thing. I think it's a real disservice. We need to be talking about whole foods and as unprocessed foods as possible. It should be fairly common sense in 2020 what we should be eating, but Joe Rogan's eating nothing but meat right now. And he has less aches, he says, so therefore we should all do it. Yeah.
Hi.
Where are you?
Over here.
It's like a blinding lights. Oh, yeah, there you are. Okay.
How are you? Thank you. I'm a little technical oriented, so I hope you don't mind this question.
No, I don't mind it at all.
Tell me about the IGF-1. You're saying it's a growth factor. Do you mean in the chickens and the meat or in the kids because they eat that? And that's part of a few things.
So IGF-1 is in your body. It's created in your body. It's stimulated by certain amino acids, specifically leucine, which is why people say, well, what's the difference between animal protein? I've got several reasons I think animal protein is different than plant protein. First of all, what comes with it, because nothing should be taken in isolation like I was just talking about. But also because animal protein has a different amino acid thumbprint than plant protein does. In other words, animal protein has very high leucine in it, which the bodybuilders love because they want IGF-1 stimulation because IGF-1 stimulation will help them grow some muscle, which is not to say that plant-based people can't grow muscle, but typically, you're taking extra protein supplements to get that IGF-1 stimulation. Secondly, animal protein also has more methionine, which is a sulfur-containing amino acid, which leads to acidosis. This is getting more technical.
That's good.
Yeah, but basically, if you're eating a high animal protein diet, you are stimulating IGF-1. How much that participates in obesity is hard to say, but I think it has a role in it.
And the other thing I was going to say is I was interested what you said about the stretch on the vagus nerve.
Yes.
And that butyrate, because I've heard of that in another way. I didn't know it was a short-chain fatty acid versus medium-chain, but if you could say something.
Short-chain fatty acids are very interesting. They are made by a certain microbacterium in your bowel. And we know that short-chain fatty acids are extremely anti-inflammatory. And so if you look at people that eat a higher fiber diet, they have higher short-chain fatty acids. They then tend to have less cancers or dysplastic cells in their colon and colon cancer, things like that. But we're also now seeing that this may have a role in other things, anti-inflammation and possibly even in affecting certain satiety hormones.
Thank you. The last thing was, what was GLP-1 with what kind of bypass?
Yeah, well, the gastric bypass, it activates a hormone called GLP-1. So GLP-1, it comes from these cells in the small intestine called incretin cells. And GLP-1 is the same hormone that a lot of the diabetes medications are trying. In fact, the diabetes medications were somewhat created because of the results that gastric bypass was getting. So they said gastric bypass is working for diabetes. What is it doing? It's activating GLP-1. GLP-1 has effect on insulin sensitivity and insulin secretion. And so a lot of these medications that you hear, Januvia, Jardiance, all these different new medications, Byetta, they're all working on GLP-1 to increase GLP-1 for diabetes. Sure.
Hi.
Yes.
I just wanted to know where does acid reflux play a role in this surgery or in general?
Yeah, so acid reflux is a serious problem. So besides doing weight loss surgery, I also do a lot of acid reflux surgery. Diet has an effect on reflux. We know that there's a muscle at the lower part of the esophagus called the lower esophageal sphincter. Caffeine will dilate that. Red wine will dilate that. Caffeine and red wine together will definitely dilate that. So if you have some wine and coffee with your dinner, you will have some reflux later. A lot of it is anatomical. The more overweight you are, the more it pushes up on the diaphragm and create what's called a hiatal hernia, where part of your stomach starts slipping into the chest. If that lower esophageal sphincter gets pushed into the chest, it doesn't work as well, and then you get really bad reflux. The gastric bypass basically cures this, because with the gastric bypass, we're separating the stomach with all the acid away from the esophagus so that it can't get up to the esophagus. So people, it's a great treatment for reflux. And people that aren't overweight, we don't do a gastric bypass. We pull the stomach back into the belly and we wrap it around itself and tie it to itself so that we recreate the valve. Getting kind of technical. But yeah, reflux is a serious problem. The best way to prevent ever getting reflux is to have normal body weight, because body weight is a big predictor of getting reflux. But certainly I have a lot of skinny patients that get reflux disease just because they have an incompetent lower valve. Yes.
Hello, doctor. Right here.
There we go. Yes.
Hello. I had a biliopancreatic diversion and duodenal switch 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Best thing I ever did, because
Yes.
I truly believed it saved my life at
Yes.
the time. Gained back, lost 200, gained back about 20, 25. But in the last 5 months, I've lost 35.
Great.
As I'm trying to go closer and closer to more plant-based foods. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer and closer. But one of the things that I find interesting is how many people have approached me and said, oh, most people who have bariatric surgery gain the weight back. And I'm like, really? And they're looking at me like I'm weird, you know, because I haven't, not really. And so is there a high level of recidivism with people who have had gastric surgery?
So there's a high level of gaining some weight back. So there's a nadir, but getting back to the original weight, no. That's a very low percentage of people doing that, especially with the surgery you had, which makes it very hard. Now, the surgery you had is a malabsorption procedure. Your body does adapt to that, so it becomes more absorptive. So it is easy to gain back a little bit more weight because it becomes more absorptive. So it's normal to gain back a little bit of weight. Your body does not want to lose weight. The leptin levels drop. When you lose weight, your metabolism slows. Metabolism drop with gastric bypass looks like the metabolism drop from The Biggest Loser. So your metabolism drops tremendously. So your body's going to work to try to get that weight back. And so you do. I always tell my patients, this is a journey. It's not a destination. It's not like you arrive at a weight and you're like, I'm here, bring on the cheeseburger. It's got to be a constant work to keep yourself at a normal weight. It is. I think I see a hand right there. Oh,
over here.
Gosh. Okay, we got
How's
over
it
there, and then
going?
someone up here wants to ask a question too.
I'm a PA. I work in the primary care setting, and I find the few patients that do come to me post-bariatric surgery are all on a very frequent small meals with high protein. And as a primary care doctor, I don't feel like they trust my opinion or what I have to say about that. And I'm just curious what I can do as a primary care provider to kind of help change some of those minds and those attitudes.
Yeah, this problem goes back to the fact that I said at the very beginning of this talk, where I go to my society meetings, and the bariatric surgery kind of works a little bit too well, so well that like my colleagues have become so cocky about it that they don't even study diet, right? And they don't study food. And so they tell their patients, eat a bunch of protein, but they don't really even care about food that much, you know? And the funny thing is when people start gaining back weight and they're like, okay, well, let's do another weight loss surgery. Like, let's talk for a second about what they're eating. I mean, telling someone you're making their stomach smaller so they could eat less food, then you're going to tell them to eat frequently. That's going to make them eat the equivalent amount that they would have eaten if they had the whole stomach there. When I first got to Asheville, that's exactly what they were doing. So the surgeons there that hired me up there to come out and take over the program, they were having some, I was looking at the results. I was like, your results are not that great. And I had to sit down with the dietitians and say, you got to understand, we're trying to It turns out, funny enough, if we start getting into anti-aging, the best way to anti-age is to not eat, all right? The less you eat, the better, to a point, but the less you eat, the better. They've done all these anti-aging studies. And specifically, the less you eat of protein, the better. Because protein may be the kind of driver of aging. And so I want people to eat less. I don't want them to eat more. And so I don't want a patient eating if they're not hungry. I want them to eat on scheduled times, never grazing, and basically that's setting up grazing. And so when I changed the program at Asheville, now our weight loss is right back on track. People are doing fantastic. So what can you do is hard because they're going to trust their bariatric surgeon, but I think you could give your opinion is that they, need to eat at more structured meal times and not eat when they're not hungry.
Yes, thanks for taking my question. So my sister has MS, And I'm wondering if your surgery has ever had any kind of positive effects on MS?
I have done the surgery several times on people with MS. I can't tell you that I've ever seen any research that it helps. There's some research with plant-based diets in MS. There is some research with fasting in MS, interestingly. Walter Longo is one of the aging experts in the world, and he's got a diet called I really like this diet. It's called the fast mimicking diet. There's a company called Prolon that he started, but he's no longer part of, that creates these little meals. But they had one study on MS that was somewhat promising. So fasting and a plant-based diet may help with MS, but there's not any really good evidence. Does weight loss surgery help? I don't know. I've done it, and the patients did well, but did their MS do any better? I can't tell you. I don't know.
There's a new movement for this transfusion.
Yeah.
To go help
to go
MS.
with the MS.
I don't know anything.
Transfusion for MS. It'd be interesting. Got to test it. I would caution people again. You hear some of these things are so exciting. Transfusion, or this supplement or that supplement, and everybody gets really excited about that. That's not science. There's going to be anecdotal. I was speaking to a lady earlier, which is really interesting because she was asking me about meat, and she cured her cancer by increasing some of her meat consumption, which goes against everything that science says, but it worked for her. Some things will work for some people, some won't for others. Right now, the science doesn't show anything that I know of in these categories.
And one last thing. You kind of touched on it, but I don't know if you really touched on it. Grazing. Like every 2.5, 3 hours, I have like a piece of fruit or some nuts or but you're against that?
Yeah, I tend to be moving more and more. Look, first of all, and this goes to what I just said about a lady who cured her cancer with eating some meat. It worked for her. If it works for you, when a patient comes into me and they're like, they've lost a ton of weight, they feel great, and I look at something in their diet log I don't like, I'll say to them, look, this goes against what I typically teach, but it's working for you, so do it. In general, I find that grazing is counterproductive to losing weight. It tends to allow you to consume more calories over the daytime because you're not getting that stretch receptor full. Now, some people argue that originally when we first started doing frequent meals, there used to be a stage where I sat up here and told people, eat frequent meals to lose weight. Because the idea was it would prevent you from getting so hungry that you eat too much at the next meal. The evidence is now moving against that. It's moving more to this time-restricted areas of eating at certain specific times. I think Brenda said that this morning too. Eat at a certain specific time every time and don't graze. In my experience, which is pretty vast on this topic, grazing tends to get people gaining weight. Which to the person asking about how do you gain weight, you graze. Eat all during the day. Yeah. Yes?
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed and learned a lot from your talk.
Thank you.
I'm a yoga teacher, and speaking of MS, there's a lot of improvement that people with MS can make by doing yoga.
Yeah, with the spasticity,
I have had
for
students, and I took a special training in yoga for MS.
Oh, great. Excellent. I need to do some yoga. Tomorrow morning. How early is tomorrow morning? Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe you'll see me though.
Hi, you put up a slide. Could you please expand on that? You said something about drink 15 minutes before we eat and do not drink while we're eating, and then
that's more for weight loss surgery patients specifically. I should have taken that in specific. So we want the food bolus to stay in the stomach as long as possible, so it continues to put a stretch on the vagus nerve. In some studies we did, where we had people eat and then we did x-rays and watched them drink, it pushed the food bolus through quicker. So we found that holding it in there longer. The other thing that's interesting, and this goes to sugar, but it also goes to fruit too. If you eat just fruit for breakfast, for instance, you may find that you're hungrier a little bit earlier. What we have found is that with more dense sugars, if you push them through pretty quickly with some water, it tends to spike the sugar a little bit faster, and then has a faster drop in sugar. It tends to make you hungrier sooner. So with our weight loss surgery patients, we have them drink before they eat cold water with a little bit of Metamucil. That kind of fills them up before, and the Metamucil slows the sugar absorption of whatever they eat afterwards. Then they eat and they don't drink for 30 minutes afterwards. It helps. Good questions, everybody. I think that's it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.